Welcome to C-Suite Blueprint Radio, conversations with communications strategy consultant and author Ed Barks and his guests. C-Suite Blueprint Radio serves as a practical resource for senior communications and government relations executives who counsel their C-suite leaders. Our goal? To help you achieve your business and public policy goals. Now, here's your host, Ed Barks.
Jennifer Keohane is Assistant Professor and Director of Oral Communication at the University of Baltimore and a co-founder of the Character Assassination and Reputation Politics Research Lab, or CARP. She investigates the unique character attacks launched at women in politics. With the founding members of CARP, she co-edited the Routledge Handbook on Character Assassination and Reputation Management and co-wrote the forthcoming book, Character Assassination and Reputation Management, Theory and Applications. And that is what we're here to talk about today, how to deal with reputational attacks. Jennifer, welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
Well, we're excited to have you here as well. Tell me, to start off, how can communications and public affairs officers prepare their C-suite and other spokespeople who are in the public eye to respond to reputational attacks?
That's a great question. I'll start by framing it a little bit generally, and then we can talk more about some specific strategies in a second here. But I think the most important thing for us to start by understanding is that the public now associates C-suite executives with the organization, and that's especially true with well-known companies. And so it's important that folks in the public eye take seriously their role as the face of the organization. And certainly we can think of examples when problem CEOs or founders have run into challenges that have had negative impacts on their organizations, whether it's Adam Newman at WeWork or Travis Kalanick at Uber. Your character as a C-suite level executive becomes associated with your organizations, your trustworthiness, your ethics, all of that becomes part and parcel of your organization. And so as someone who spent a career studying communication, unsurprisingly, I'll tell you it's so important for these people to undergo communication training, because all of the research indicates that effective public speaking skills are how you build trust, and your reputation is all about whether people trust you. Rhetorical scholars have long turned to the concepts of ethos, pathos, and logos from our founding father Aristotle as a way to kind of indicate what an effective, persuasive message includes. And so ethos is about your credibility, pathos is about your ability to evoke emotions in your audience, and logos is about a logical message. And so anyone who's the face of an organization needs to be able to weave those three things together. Rhetoric also gives us the concept of kairos, which is about timing. So recognizing the importance of responding in a timely and consistent manner to organization's reputational threats is important. And the last thing I'll say here is just that it's important to understand there's no silver bullet. There's no universal recipe that will always protect an organization, which is why analyzing the context of any reputational threat is so important.
And what are some of the best tools out there to help determine when an attack is imminent?
Yes. So first of all, the best thing, and this sounds kind of obvious, but the best thing you can do is to make sure that your reputation doesn't get damaged in the first place. And so that requires any executive or organization to be proactive in engaging in behaviors that build the company's reputation. One great example here is Alfred Nobel, who endowed the Nobel Prizes, saw an obituary when his death was accidentally reported, and they said that the merchant of death was dead, and he had a lot of patents in weapons, of course, and so he endowed these prizes to protect his reputation once he saw how people were remembering him. And so it's important to make deposits into your reputational capital by doing things like donating to community charities and environmental programs, because then when reputational challenges come, those effectively become deposits in your bank account, right? And so having a solid balance going into any type of threat is important.
And once those deposits are in the bank account, give us a glimpse into what communications and public affairs officers can do in advance, ahead of time, in an attempt to forestall or to minimize attacks.
Absolutely. It's so important to run assessments both on the threats facing your organization and on potential reputational threats coming from your C-suite level executives. And so it's important to look at both what we call issues and what we call risks. Issues are things external to your organization in the social or political environment, such as changing legislation, changing community values that could generate a problem. And risks are internal things to your organization, weaknesses that may come from loose cannon personnel, perhaps, or weaknesses in the product itself. But ultimately, there needs to be an in-depth monitoring of the communication environment, and that includes mainstream media and social media to find the public conversation around your organization and your product. One last thing I'll note here is that risk assessors typically identify threats by multiplying the potential impact or the outcome times the likelihood or how likely it is that something will come to the surface. And that's a useful metric to figure out how to respond. But having a crisis management plan, which includes a team, which includes communication channels, will help you be able to figure out then what to say once you've identified that there are issues or risks that could come to the surface.
When I look at this from admittedly an anecdotal perspective, it seems to me that character assassination has grown worse in recent times. Is that due to the ease of attacks on sources like digital media?
That's a great question. And it's something that we get asked a lot as folks who study this. I'm not actually sure that the environment is more poisonous now than it used to be. Character assassination exists in every era that we've investigated, and that includes the realms of politics and business. And so we can go back to ancient Egypt when Pharaoh Akhenaten died. His son King Tut took over and basically erased his memory by destroying buildings and defacing his sarcophagus. Likewise, in ancient Rome, speeches in the Senate could be intense character attacks, such as when Cicero attacked Catiline. And Cicero used many techniques that we still use today, including attaching powerful inflammatory labels to his opponent, inducing fear and anxiety. Last example that I will point to quick is if you've seen Hamilton, the musical, you know that the founding fathers constantly vilified each other in the press. So all of that is to say character assassination has a really long history, and even the specific techniques that were used have remained somewhat similar. But your point is really well taken, right? That there are new things that happen today. Social media has effectively democratized character assassination. You don't need access to a TV station or a printing press in order to be able to launch attacks. And in fact, crisis management communication scholars have identified the social media crisis as a unique type of crisis for organizations. Obviously, the rapid pace of information and the relentless news cycle makes it easy for what another crisis communication guru, Eric Desenhall, calls a fiasco vortex, how things quickly spiral out of control. And of course, for the business perspective, stakeholder activism, or the ability for customers and other folks with stakes in your organization to share their opinions on social media, makes it a lot harder for folks in the public eye to control their own reputation. So all of that is to say there are unique things that are happening today that make it much easier and faster and harder to control. But the idea that folks would use communication to attack the character and credibility and trustworthiness of others is certainly not a new phenomenon.
I want to dig more into some of these reasons in a moment, but first, a quick reminder for our listeners. To keep up with the latest in communications strategy and training, become a member of the communications community. When you sign up online at barkscom.com, you receive a checklist, making you eligible to receive our insider strategies briefs that offer advice on dealing with the media, speaking in public, and advocating before policymakers. You'll also receive twice monthly emails to help you sharpen your communications edge. Just visit barkscom.com and tell us where to send it. Join the community today. Back now with Jennifer Keohane and our conversation about reputation management. Let's talk a little bit more about follow up on your most recent response, Jennifer. How has the overall coarsening of public debate contributed to reputational attacks?
I think it certainly means that anyone who is in the public eye, whether that's in the business realm or the political realm, needs to have a preparation plan in place. Because again, the ease of launching attacks on social media and the general, as you point to, kind of polarization of our political discourse does mean that reputational attacks exist everywhere in the sort of communication atmosphere in which all of us operate. And so that, I think, makes it even more important for folks to recognize that when your reputation is under attack, you need to have a plan for dealing with it. And certainly all of the research suggests that quick, consistent, and frequent communication is really significant for forestalling and minimizing the damage that may come as a result of any reputational attack.
Is there a connection here between that and between the alarming number of Americans who these days put stock in conspiracy theories?
You know, it's tough to draw a direct sort of correlation there, but I think your point is really well taken, that it becomes a lot harder to respond to attacks when you can't sort of recognize, or everyone's not really coming to the public sphere with the same foundation of, well, we should seek truth and we should look for evidence to back up our points. And it really does kind of strike a heart at the foundation of effective communication in the form of ethos, pathos, and logos. You know, humans are motivated to reduce uncertainty when things kind of go awry. And typically they do so by looking for explanations, and explanations that are backed by clear facts and have sort of a consistent and coherent worldview are typically the things that we would tell organizations to circulate in the face of reputational attacks. And while certainly I think those things are still true, it certainly makes it a much harder challenge when you're trying to shut down or respond to people who are just coming from a very different foundation for public discourse than you are. And there's no easy answer to that. I suspect that your listeners have seen that recent study that showed that misinformation or disinformation circulates through social media so much faster than any attempt to correct the record. So it creates a significant challenge. But I do think that for those in the public eye, responding quickly, consistently, factually, and frequently, and providing good evidence for their claims is still the best way to go.
Indeed, and I'm not sure if we're referencing the same study, but I know also with respect to misinformation and disinformation, the fact is when certain accounts that are very active and very active about disseminating that type of misinformation are shut down, the percentages go way down in terms of that kind of crackpot information is circulated. Jennifer, your forthcoming research includes the book Character Assassination and Reputation Management. Can you give us a sneak peek into that?
I would love to. We're actually really excited about this book. It's forthcoming from Routledge. We submitted our page proofs back to the editor earlier this week, actually. So it is about to go into production and should be available this summer, but already available on Routledge's website for pre-order. But we have actually designed it as kind of a textbook or sort of an overview primer on character assassination. So especially for folks who are just learning of this phenomenon or who may have been thrown into this as a result of a reputational attack that they have faced, I suspect that this book will be really relevant and useful. So it outlines our approach to studying character assassination, including kind of the pillars that we've created, which include understanding the context, the audience, the target, the attacker, and the medium in which it's circulating. We go through some of the history that I briefly alluded to here, provide some methodologies for studying it, but also do provide information about how to respond, the role of the media, and we look at some specific case studies related to things like gender and sexuality, international relations, the difference between character attacks in democratic versus authoritarian societies. So it's got a whole bunch in there, but is really designed to be an approachable introduction to the topic. So I think it will be of interest to a lot of your listeners.
Great. And what's the best way for listeners to, number one, learn more about the book, and number two, get in touch with you with any questions or comments?
Yeah, so we are online, obviously, and you can find more about the CARP Research Lab at carpresearchlab.org. We also have a Twitter, carp_lab, and you can find me on Twitter at Keohane, J.A. And I would love to hear from you and to hear how these types of concepts and challenges are facing your organizations and your leaders.
Jennifer, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
And again, our thanks to Jennifer Keohane of the University of Baltimore and the CARP Research Lab for sharing her insights on reputation management and for joining us on C-Suite Blueprint Radio. This is Ed Barks. Until next time.
Thank you for listening to C-Suite Blueprint Radio with Ed Barks. Check out the show notes on the C-Suite Blueprint blog. While you're there, comment on this episode by sharing your thoughts in the Leave a Reply box. To learn how Ed can help you reach your business and public policy goals, visit barkscom.com. That's BARKSCOMM.com. Tune in again soon here on C-Suite Blueprint Radio.